Most digital transformations don't fail because of bad technology. Most of them fail because of change management mistakes that leaders don't even know that they're making. That's what I want to talk about in today's video. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And one of the services we provide to our clients is change management. We'll help clients navigate organizational readiness. We'll help them develop a change strategy, identify change impacts, and ultimately roll out the changes to the organization. And there's 5 key traps that we commonly see leaders fall into when going through these digital transformations. And these are 5 very damaging mistakes and very common mistakes. And if any of these on the list that we talk about here today are mistakes that you are making, or if they sound familiar to you and your team, then chances are you've got a problem and you've got a change management issue to deal with. So what I want to do today is talk about those 5 change management traps, and I'd be curious to hear from you in the comments below which one resonates the most with you. If you're leading a digital transformation or ERP initiative and you want to avoid the costly mistakes that most organizations make, that's where Third Stage Consulting comes in. We are an independent and technology advisory firm, meaning that we don't sell software, we don't take commissions from vendors. Our only job is to protect your interests and be on your side. We help executives and project teams plan, deliver, and recover digital transformations and ERP projects, reducing risk, improving adoption, and delivering real business value. If you want clarity before you commit to your digital strategy, or if something feels off track to you, feel free to reach out to us at thirdstage-consulting.com, and my team and I would be happy to help. Let's start with the most dangerous change management trap, and this is one that starts at the top of your organization. The common leadership trap that we see here is that leaders will say they support change, but they don't actually lead the change, and they're not actually engaged with it. Instead, what happens is leaders will oftentimes delegate change to other people. They'll delegate it to the project manager, they might delegate it to the project team, or they might delegate it to a change lead and assume that those people will handle the change for them. Well, the reality is that leaders need to be the ones to drive the changes and to be the face of changes and to make those ultimate uncomfortable decisions that every leader has to make during a digital transformation. Some leaders think that they just show up to the project kickoff. They might show up at certain milestones. They'll send out a few emails. They'll mention the project and how great it's going in all company meetings. They might show up for the go live celebration. That's all important stuff. You need to be present, but there's a lot more to providing strong leadership that's required for these sorts of projects. Real change and strong leadership requires constant messaging. It requires visibility, but more importantly, it requires strong and decisive decision making. These sorts of projects are difficult. There's a lot of trade-offs that need to be made during a digital transformation, and it's the leadership that has to make those decisions. A lot of times, leaders will think they can just defer to what the technology can or can't do. They'll defer to the technologists or the software vendor or the system integrator to tell them how to run their business, and this is a terrible idea. This is the exact opposite of what strong leadership entails. My team and I have been involved with hundreds of different digital transformations, and the strongest leaders, the most effective leaders we've seen are the ones that get their hands dirty and they get involved in making key decisions of what their business is going to look like in the future. Now, they don't necessarily need to micromanage. They don't necessarily need to be involved in every single meeting and design decision that's made. They don't have time for that, and they probably don't have the right skill set for that anyway, but what they do need to do is make the high-level strategic decisions that are so important to the project. But what too often happens is that these leaders will defer to outside third parties to make the decisions for them. Then they wonder why their teams are resisting change and why the change isn't sticking. Well, the reason that is because the change didn't come from within, it came from someone outside the organization. So strong leadership is required, and it's important for your leadership team to understand what strong leadership looks like. And one rule of thumb here is that if the leadership team isn't slightly uncomfortable throughout the entire digital transformation, then they're probably not doing their job and they're not making the decisions that they need to make because these decisions are very difficult. And when the leadership team doesn't lead the change and make these tough decisions, what happens then is that change resistance will fill that void, and that's what I'll talk about later in this video. Oftentimes, organizations view resistance to change as something that needs to be suppressed, something that needs to be managed. And actually, that's the wrong way of thinking about it. The way resistance to change should be thought about is it's a signal, it's a symptom of something deeper. It means that people aren't on board with the changes that are happening. It means maybe they don't understand the changes. It means that perhaps they are threatened by the changes. I'll give you a common example we see with a lot of very well-intended employees within our client base, and that is that some of these highly tenured employees have grown up in a world within your organization where they've had limited technology, they've had broken processes, broken data, broken technologies in general, and they've had to power through with heroics and tribal knowledge. Now, when a digital transformation happens, that threatens their sense of purpose and meaning within the organization. After all, they've built their entire career on powering through despite having poor technology and poor tools to support them. They've been able to power through, which is a testament to them, their fortitude and their talents. So when you talk about automating their jobs or introducing AI to do a large part of their jobs for them, or technology to automate a large part of what they've done, that might be the right thing for the business, and it might be ultimately what you do as a business, but that person, that individual is going to be threatened by that change. And it's important that leaders recognize and understand that and anticipate it before the change resistance happens. Rather than suppressing it reactively later on, what organizations need to do is do an organizational readiness assessment early on in the project to understand where those pockets of resistance are likely to come from and proactively address them. And some of the best ways to address change resistance and get ahead of it before it becomes a problem is to provide clarity and help people understand what their jobs are going to look like in the future. There's nothing worse than lack of clarity. If they don't understand what they're going to do with all this time that technology is allegedly going to save them, that's going to be something that strikes fear into them, and it's going to cause them to resist change. The second proactive antidote to change resistance is to provide a reassurance that the person is still important. They will continue to use their heroics and their tribal knowledge and all these strengths and skills that they have. It's just going to look differently. And that comes back to the first point about needing to provide that clarity. So this is just one example, a couple solutions for how to attack the root cause of change resistance and to get ahead of it before it becomes a problem later on. And one last thing I'll mention here is that if you're surprised by resistance and you didn't anticipate the change resistance at any point in the project, then you haven't been paying enough attention to your people and to your project. Another common change management trap is the lack of focus trap. In other words, the organization's trying to do too much at once within their digital transformation. And this is a very common one that we see time and time again with our clients, especially when you have software vendors that are trying very hard to sell as much software as possible and to compress as much change as possible into as small of a timeline as possible. That's good for the vendor. That's going to benefit the vendor and the system integrators and the implementers, but it's not going to benefit you as an organization. Not only do you have to worry about the volume of technology that's being deployed, but more importantly, you have to think about what is the magnitude of change we're going to experience and how much change can we handle all at once. How do we need to pace ourselves? How do we need to set the right cadence, the right tempo for introducing these changes to the organization? And more often than not, the technology gets crammed into the organization faster than the organization can consume it. And that's why it's so important to focus. You need to focus on the technologies that are going to deliver the most value and focus on those first and pace yourself and make sure you're not trying to do too much at once. In addition to forcing too much technology in too little time, there's the non-technological things that oftentimes get deprioritized because technology consumes so much time and focus. There's things like the change management efforts, the process improvements, and making decisions, and defining what your architecture is going to be, and integration and data migration, all these different pieces of the project that oftentimes get overlooked or pushed aside because it doesn't benefit the vendor directly, and that's why that lack of focus becomes such a challenge for a lot of organizations. So the big takeaway here is that you want to make sure that you control the tempo, you manage the project, you can take inputs from your software vendor and your systems integrator, but you need to make sure that you, the leadership team, and you as a project team are defining what the project change looks like and that you define what the focus needs to be. And a little hint here is that more focus does not need to be given to technology. You probably need to take some of the attention away from technology and focus on the people and process and strategy sides of your transformation, because ultimately that's the stuff that will determine how successful your project is or isn't. Organizations often view technology initiatives as just pure technology deployments, something that people will figure out after go live, or at the very least, very close to go live. And this couldn't be further from the truth. Too often, end user training is very generic. It's not relevant to your industry, it's not relevant to your business, and it doesn't fit the way people operate and the way their jobs are designed. We'll see situations where a training team from a software vendor will try to train a manufacturer of complex products using materials that show you how to build a simple bicycle. That just doesn't resonate with end users of a very complex, highly engineered product, and they need those materials and those training and communication dimensions to focus on their jobs and their businesses. So this is why change management is so important, to ensure that you're not just doing basic training, you're actually focused on building competencies in your organization. You're building competencies on what the new processes are going to look like. You're building competencies around what the new roles are going to look like, because more than ever, enterprise technologies, especially with the advent of AI and predictive analytics and all these cool emerging technologies, more than ever, that technology is disrupting people's jobs and changing people's jobs for the better longer term in most cases, but still very difficult for people to adjust to. So we need to focus on building those competencies, not just on training someone how to do a transaction in a system. That's the easy part. The hard part is to ensure that they understand what their business processes look like and the overall competencies required to do their jobs. So this is why organizations need to spend more time on building those competencies and handling that as part of their change management initiative, even if it means redirecting resources and focus away from technology so that you can focus more time on building the internal competencies. And when this doesn't happen, what ends up happening is that employees and end users will ultimately blame the system. They'll find faults in the system, and they'll blame their lack of competency and their lack of confidence in this new environment. They'll blame that on the technology, and that will lead to even more resistance to change, and in some cases, flat out refusal to use the system, and in some cases using Excel spreadsheets and other manual workarounds. After an organization goes live with new technology, what commonly happens is that the team disbands and they go back to do their day jobs. They're exhausted, they're tired, they want to get back to what they're good at, which is doing their day-to-day jobs, and they don't take the time to optimize and learn from what has just happened and transpired. And what this leads to is a subpar implementation, where you've got technology in place that may or may not be used by the organization, and more often than not is not delivering the potential business value that organizations could be realizing from it. In a multi-phase rollout, organizations will oftentimes go live with the first phase and then just immediately go on to phase 2 without really taking the time to reflect and understand what went well and what could they be doing better to learn from that first phase to apply it to future phases of the project. Both of these situations are difficult, both of them are problems, and organizations don't spend nearly enough time optimizing and learning from what has happened throughout the project. With as fast as technology is changing and as difficult as organizations already have keeping up with these technological changes, this becomes even more important in the 2020s where we are today. And the key lesson here is that your go live is not the end goal, or should not be the end goal. It's not a finish line, it's an ongoing journey, and that may be the last thing some of you want to hear, especially if you're mired in the thick of a delayed project or one that never seems to end. But realistically speaking, technological change never stops, your business never stops changing, and continuously optimizing and learning is something that organizations could do a much better job of, especially as technology continues to change more and more rapidly over time. So these 5 traps are common. We see them time and time again. They're common patterns within the industry, but they're also avoidable. That's the good news. And oftentimes it starts with doing a simple organizational assessment early on in the project to understand in a sort of heat map sort of fashion how businesses are going to resist change. Where is the resistance going to come from? What are the sources of resistance? What are the challenges that this organization is likely to feel based on the culture that they have today and where they're headed in the future? But I'd be curious to hear from you, which of these traps have you seen in your organization or in your digital transformation initiatives? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your feedback on that. And if you'd like to learn more about how to have a more structured and deliberate strategic approach to change management to address these traps, be sure to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. You can find that by scanning the QR code right here, or you can go to the links below. And if you'd like to learn more about how Third Stage can help you with your change initiative and help you navigate the people side of change, feel free to reach out to us. I've included my contact information below. I'd be happy to chat with you about your project and give you some free advice and also talk about how we might be able to help you with your project. So I hope you found this information useful and hope you have a great day. May or may not be used, that may or may not be used. The second anecdote